Hi guys, my name's Vanessa Smedley and I'm a painter. Today we are going to channel our inner Bob Ross and we're going to paint this nice little snowy mountain scene. So let's do this! Here's the materials list for today. Feel free to pause and screenshot, or it's listed in the description for you. Now, if you would prefer that I go back to rambling on and on about the different materials, then do leave a comment and let me know. We're going to start out a little bit differently today since we have some white snow caps here. I'm using a little bit of white wax that I've taken from just a regular tea light, and I am scraping it lightly across the surface of the paper, and it's bringing in that texture. And what it does is it resists the paint and preserves the white of the paper in those kind of textury snow cappy areas. If you need a video showing you how to do that more slowly in a step-by-step manner, you can click the link above. I've mixed up some nice cerulean blue, and now I am wetting the entire area of the sky and the mountains really with my 1.5 inch Hake brush, and then I'm just dropping in that cerulean blue. I'm doing it a little bit darker at the top and graduating it down to lighter as it is in the picture. I don't want my mountains excessively blue, so I'm taking a shop towel and I am dabbing out the area of the mountains. I'm mixing up my color for the rocks here, so I start out with some Paynes Grey. I mix in just a little bit of burnt umber to neutralize it, and then I'm adding in some ultramarine blue to give it a nice blue tint. Then I mix up some Paynes Grey with some ultramarine blue in a much darker consistency so that we can use that for the shadow areas. The next step is to work on the mountains, so I am going to wet the entire area down to the horizon line, and I'm going to begin to drop in that lighter gray. After that, I'm going to begin dropping in the darker gray and then a little bit of burnt umber by itself. Here you can already see where the wax is resisting and some of the white is being preserved, only it's coming out quite a bit more subtle than I meant it to, so I may end up having to use something else in order to make it stand out more. In order to get a nice foundation of rock texture here, I'm actually going to use some saran wrap or cling film, whatever you want to call it, whichever country you're from. So I'm taking the plastic wrap and I'm balling it up, scrunching it up nice and good, and then I'm flattening it out and then laying it down on the surface of the paint. You can see that you can kind of rearrange it a little bit while it's still wet. Just don't do it too much because it might end up being a little bit of a mess. And also it might flow onto the areas of the painting that you don't want it to be on. So you get it the way you want it, and then you lay a nice heavy book on top of it, and I wait for at least 30 minutes before I remove the book. Again, I do have a video showing you how to do this more slowly, and it's the same video as before, but you can click the link above. Now I have waited for at least 30 minutes and I've taken the book off, and now we're going to peel this back, and voila, there's a nice lovely rock texture there for you. Now for me, I just use this as a base texture and then paint a lot on top of that. I just like that added extra layer of texture underneath. Now some artists will just leave it that way, but me, I like to paint on top of it. And one of the cool properties about watercolor is that usually you can see underneath it, at least to a certain degree. So now I'm taking that ultramarine blue and Paynes Grey mix and I'm dry brushing it down to add some texture to these mountains. Now halfway down this thing is going to be covered by trees, so I'm really not going to worry much about the bottom half of it, but the top bits, that's what we're working on now. Now I'm mixing up some Hooker's Green with some burnt umber and some Paynes Grey. And now it's time to add our happy little trees. Wouldn't Bob be proud? So I'm taking that green mix and I'm just brushing all of these little guys in. I'm doing these trees in sections because I don't want it to dry out before I get back to it, but I've mixed in a little bit more Paynes Grey to make that darker, and I'm adding in the shadow side of the trees. And then I work on the next section. At certain times of the year, you might be able to get away with painting the entire color across and then coming back in with the shadow, but right now it's winter time, and that is always a very, very dry time here inside the house with the heat going and all that, so it's better to do it in sections because the paint dries out way quicker. I mean, obviously, really, this painting has nothing to do with Bob Ross. It's really just mountains and evergreen trees, which always make me think of him. But I have a real affinity for the man. My mom always watched him when I was growing up. And then, I went through some traumatic times after I had a C-section when my daughter was very, very early. She was like 3 months early. And so when I was home recovering from my C-section, I was just watching Bob on the screen all the time, and he was so comforting and so calming, and really since then I really just have such an affinity for him. Then I mix up some Cerulean Blue with some French Ultramarine, and I'm going to use that for the snow. We're just going to take that blue we just mixed and we're just going to dry brush it in this little area over here that's in shadow on the snow. We're just adding in this river here, so I'm using the same color I used for the snow, and then I'm using the darker color that I mixed earlier of the blue, and then adding in some indigo to the far right. While this is still wet, I'm just using the edge of a credit card to scratch in some highlights for rocks that I'm going to put in later. I've just mixed up a thicker consistency of this green, and I'm just going to add more details in on the shadow side of these things, just to make sure that there's definition here. Then I mix in even more Paynes Grey to this to where it's almost black, and I'm coming back in to do the darkest of the dark shadows. mix up some burnt umber with some Paynes Grey, and then I'm going to use this for the rocks. I'm using a mix with more burnt umber on the left side, which is in more sunlight, and I'm just using more Paynes Grey as I move to the right in the shadow. Notice I'm not putting in each individual rock here, I'm really just putting a suggestion of a shoreline with lots of rocks. Then I just add in the trunks for these 3 trees that are the closest to us. I mean, because you can't have happy little trees without happy little trunks. Now I'm just going to add in some happy little twigs in some of these rocks. Just using my darkest blue mixture here to add in some of these darkest details in the rocks. That's the craggy bits, the little cracks here and there, stuff like that. Come back in with some indigo to add a little bit of water detail here. Now I've mixed in a little bit of white gouache with my brown, and I'm using that for the highlight side of the trunks. Now I mentioned earlier that I felt like the snow cap came out a little bit too subtle, so I'm actually coming back in with just some gouache, some white gouache straight out of the tube, and I'm adding that to the snowy mountaintops. And now I'm going to take some pastel pencils and add a few final details. Here I've got a light green and I'm just adding a little bit of highlight to some of these darker areas. And then I'm going to use a white one for the sides of some trunks, and I'm going to use a brown one to add some shadow to the twigs down here. And here's the finished product, all signed and dried and with the tape removed. And I hope that Bob would be happy. And there you have it, a nice little mountain scene where you can house your happy little trees with your happy little squirrels and your happy little rivers and your happy little rocks and your... Okay, anyway. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, all that stuff, because that's how this channel gets to grow. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again next time.